Well, the Donald says, I'm not going to blow it. He thinks it's almost finished. There's still a little bit more to go, but he's riding high after New York. The president goes to Saudi Arabia and is snubbed by the king. They sent some lesser official out to greet him, which is an absolute insult. And it looks like some people may be going to jail on account of a cover-up in that Flint, Michigan water deal. So we've got all kinds of interesting things for you today. But first of all, the president is trying to repair America's relationship with key countries in the Middle East. I don't think he's very successful in it.
Well, that trip to Saudi Arabia that you mentioned just happened this week, as new questions are coming up about possible Saudi connections to terrorism and the attacks on 9/11. Jennifer Wishon has that story.
When President Obama touched down on Saudi soil, King Salman wasn't there to greet him. Instead, he sent lower-ranking royals, a sign experts say of the tense relations between the U.S. and its key Middle Eastern ally.
It's always a pleasure to see you.
The president's visit comes amid new questions about the possible involvement of Saudi officials in the terrorist attacks on 9/11. And as 9/11 victims asked the president to declassify 28 pages from the 9/11 Commission report, pages thought to point fingers at Saudi Arabia.
We have to examine that relationship and how we deal with terrorist financing issues and how we need to work with the Saudis as an ally rather than as an enemy.
House Homeland Security Chairman Michael McCaul has read the classified 28 pages and been briefed by the person who wrote them. He believes they aren't as explosive as some might think.
He told me that the leads that are in the 28 pages, they actually did their investigations and that the leads didn't go where they thought they would.
Meanwhile, Congress is considering a bipartisan bill that would prevent Saudi Arabia and any other country with alleged terrorist ties from claiming immunity in U.S. courts. That would allow the families of 9/11 victims to sue Saudi Arabia.
And the victims of terrorism in our country should be able to seek justice from people who do fund that terrorist attack.
Other members of Congress are treading lightly.
I think we need to review it to make sure that we're not making mistakes with our allies.
President Obama and critics of the bill fear it could open up the U.S. to lawsuits from people around the world.
Saudis were not complicit in terrorism. They have nothing to fear.
If the bill passes, Saudi leaders are threatening to sell up to $750 billion worth of U.S. government securities, a move that some fear could disrupt world markets, while other analysts doubt the Saudis either could or would do it because it could hurt their economy as much as the U.S. President Obama moves on to Europe now to meet with British and German leaders. White House officials say the president cleared the air with the Saudis, and he's relying on the U.S. relationship with them during his final months in office as he tries to deal with the exceedingly complicated Middle East that critics say has unraveled during his presidency. Jennifer Wishon, CBN News.
Thanks, Jennifer. There's no question that 18 of those 9/11 hijackers were Saudi citizens. There's no question that the Wahhabi faith has dominant influence, and there is no question that the Saudis mistreat women, violate the civil rights of a number of people, or actually hold virtual slaves, people who are their maids and workers from places like the Philippines. I mean, they do bad things in the Saudi. And yet we've had this relationship over the years where we buy their oil and they take our dollars, and then they take our dollars and recycle them through the big banks in New York. And so the big boys like it because the Saudis are putting huge amounts of money in their pocket. But that cozy relationship is coming unglued, it looks like, right now. I think this legislation, though, is ill-advised. We have what's called sovereign immunity, and we don't want countries getting sued. You don't want, would you want 1,000 lawsuits against the United States for petty grievances of people all around the world? No way. Well, that's what this thing would open up to America, so we can't have it done. But at the same time, there are people inside of Saudi Arabia who are putting out billions of dollars to fund terrorism. It's still going on. And the way, you know, I remember when President George Bush #1 we had a coalition to deliver the Saudis from the aggression of Saddam Hussein in Iran. His troops were coming close to the border, so we put a blocking motion there with our troops. So the President of the United States has troops there in Saudi Arabia, but comes Thanksgiving time to give thanks to God. And what does he do? He has Thanksgiving on board a United States destroyer out in the water, so he, quote, wouldn't offend the sensibilities of the Saudis. Baloney. Well, another country in the Middle East, Syria, has been fighting a civil war for 5 years. And that war is affecting one of its neighbors, Israel. I've been there in the Golan Heights, and I think we're going to see what's there. Wendy Griffith has that story.
That's right, Pat. That civil war in Syria could become a security threat for Israel. But Israel, as you know, controls the Golan Heights along its border with Syria. And as Chris Mitchell reports, Israel is making it clear that it will never give up that strategic area.
For the first time in 49 years, the Israeli government held a special cabinet meeting on the Golan Heights. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu delivered a strong message to the world.
The Golan Heights will forever remain in Israel's hands. Israel will never come down from the Golan Heights.
Syria's foreign minister responded by saying Syria is prepared to use military means to recapture the Golan Heights. But citing Israel's ancient connection to the Golan, Netanyahu said it's time for the international community to recognize after 50 years that the Golan Heights will permanently remain in Israel's hands.
In the stormy region around us, Israel's the stabilizing factor. Israel's the solution, not the problem.
Netanyahu's declaration comes against the backdrop of peace talks in Geneva regarding Syria's civil war, a war that has threatened to spill over into Israel. The borders of Syria and Israel meet on the peaks of Mount Hermon on the Golan Heights. I'm standing on Mount Hermon, and behind me is Syria. It's a bit hard to see because of the haze today, but for nearly 40 years, this has been one of Israel's quietest borders. But since the beginning of the Syrian civil war, it's become one of the most unpredictable. Major Nati Aharon is a company commander on Mount Hermon. We can't show you the Israeli bases for security reasons, but the mountain is called the Eyes of the Country, since from its commanding vantage point, you can see all the way to Damascus.
Our eyes see all that's happening on the eastern side. We're checking everything that's happening there, and sadly, we see all the fighting. We need to be high enough so it's possible to see in the distance during the day and the night.
That fighting has changed Israel's border.
From the Israeli point of view, a year and a half ago, we have a dramatic change along the border when Al-Qaeda groups took over and actually control Quneitra Gate and control the 50 miles of the Syrian border.
And as retired IDF colonel and security expert Kobi Marone points out, in addition to Al-Qaeda, attention must be focused on Iran and Hezbollah.
The second thing from the Israeli point of view, Iran is about 1,000 miles away from here, but the chaos in Syria gave the Iranian regime a great opportunity to try to create in the northern part of the Golan Heights a real threat against Israel on the ground.
These recent satellite images released by Stratfor Intelligence demonstrate how Iran's proxy Hezbollah has built a fortified base inside Syria. Some expect it could be used as a missile base to strike Israel. In nearby Lebanon, they already have 100,000 missiles aimed at Israel.
It's part of the strategy that there is a chaos in Syria right now. And if they decided to retaliate to any Israeli attack, they can do it in Syria, which is not a country anymore. That's why they keep the Lebanese border very quiet. And if they decided to retaliate, they're doing it from the Syrian territory. That's why they build those new bases right now.
And Russia has also seen an opportunity in the Syrian civil war.
Since the withdrawal from Iraq in 2012, we see a clear decline of the American strategy over the Middle East, and the Russians use it very well. They are all over. I don't see American troops on the ground in the near future, and the Russia knows it, and that's why they not just keep their interest, they become the key player, and they actually, unfortunately, use the American weakness all over the Middle East.
In the meantime, Aharon and his company will keep watch on Israel's border.
First of all, we're very proud. It's a big privilege to be a commander and serve the people of this country. Everybody does their part. It's a long commitment, but it's worth it.
Chris Mitchell, CBN News, Mount Hermon, the Israeli Golan Heights.
Pat, like you said, you were there. We were there during the war with Hezbollah in 2006, and you know how important that piece of property is to Israel.
Well, the Palestinians, the Arabs, whoever used that land, that Syrian land on the Golan to rain down terror on the Israeli farmers in the Hula Valley, and there is no way. You know, when Israel took it back and they fought a bloody fight to get the Golan Heights, it was a brutal tank battle, one of the biggest in the world's history. And having won that high ground, Israel annexed the Golan Heights, and they aren't going to give the Golan back. I mean, it's been annexed. It isn't a question of like we sharing it or this is a little occupation. This is ours. It's now Israeli territory. And they would be absolutely fools to give it back, and they're not going to do it. And there's nobody around in the world who can take it away from them. But I was there, as Wendy pointed out, and you could see, you know, from there you could look almost into Damascus. It's just a short run. You go through Quneitra and then down the plains, and you're into Damascus. So it's a key choke point, and Israel needs it, and it needs to protect it for its own security. So it'll be that way. But this thing is heating up all over the world, ladies and gentlemen. Israel is in the crosshairs, and at the United Nations, other parts of the world, and in Europe, there's a drumbeat to destroy Israel. And here in America, we've got these idiots in these colleges. They've got the divestment movement, BD, whatever they call it. And they're saying, well, we've got to, the Israelis are mistreating the Palestinians, and therefore, we've got to sell our investments in Israeli companies and anybody that deals with Israel. I mean, this is misguided foolishness. Wendy?
Pat, the death toll in Ecuador is now well over 550 after last weekend's major earthquake, and it's difficult to get food, water, and other supplies to all the people who need them. As our Chuck Holton reports, CBN and Operation Blessing are on the ground. They're making a difference, but there's still much more to be done.
These survivors of last week's quake have been waiting in line all day for a food truck to deliver supplies. As of 5 p.m., the truck had not arrived, and tempers were starting to flare.
We need a lot of things, especially food, meal, water. There's no water.
There's no water in the tap. How do we bathe or drink? What little they are giving out isn't nearly enough.
The scale of this disaster makes quick response very difficult. Many of those affected are in remote areas along the coast, now reachable only by air. These Ecuadorian Air Force helicopters are struggling to get enough aid to small villages near the epicenter of the quake. CBN accompanied this flight to the town of Hama. Now we're going to wait for them to unload the helicopter, turn around and go right back where we came from. Soldiers quickly unloaded the supplies, a drop in the bucket compared to the need. Many of these buildings in Puerto Viejo still standing are now uninhabitable and will have to be demolished. And rescue workers continue to race against the clock, looking for survivors amid the ruins. As if destroyed buildings and infrastructure, hundreds still trapped, and tens of thousands homeless weren't enough. A lack of fresh water is the latest tragedy in the unfolding crisis in Ecuador. With temperatures in the 90s during the day, dehydration is becoming a real issue. City dwellers like these in the city of Manta are flocking to distribution centers looking for food, clothing, and fresh water. Throughout the area, people are getting desperate, and Operation Blessing is stepping in to help. Pastor Paul Candela heads a large church in Puerto Viejo that's working together with Operation Blessing.
Things are pretty difficult right now because as the hours and days go by, things get more complicated. The rescue teams will soon stop looking for survivors and just move forward with the recovery of those who have died in the rubble.
Church members are volunteering to help OB assemble and distribute hundreds of care packages with food and water.
We see a future where there will be a lot of suffering because employees without work means business owners without businesses, which means people won't be able to pay their bills and they won't have a way to get by. Everything affects everything else, and this will lead to big social problems in the future.
The Operation Blessing volunteers are working to alleviate people's suffering and save lives by reaching areas outside the city.
Right now we are focused on serving the community, going to outlying places that have no food or water and giving out supplies.
And the situation is worst where thirsty people line the roads begging for water and getting more and more desperate with every car that passes by. Carmen Rivera's baby, John Paul, is only 3 weeks old. His mother is beside herself.
There is no milk or diapers for my baby. He can't nurse because I'm not making milk and his formula has run out. The stores are closed up because the buildings are all destroyed. We sent someone out to look for milk, but they couldn't find any.
It will likely be months before these residents can get water from their own taps again, and many here are afraid they won't be able to hold out that long. Operation Blessing will stay here as long as it takes, bringing water to the people who need it most. Chuck Holton, CBN News, Manta, Ecuador.
Thanks so much, Chuck. Great that we're there, Pat, but like you said, so much more to be done.
Yeah, your heart goes out to those people. Ladies and gentlemen, your heart aches. Mother with no milk, no food for her baby, no water to drink, heat in the 90-degree range, and people fainting from heat prostration. It's terrible to think about. But ladies and gentlemen, we're there to help. So if you want to participate, CBN's there. Operation Blessing or CBN Disaster Relief, and the address is on your screen right there. We're helping, we're there, and you can be there with us. But again, this world that we live in is, in my opinion, in a critical condition. Economically, it is right on a knife's edge, waiting for some collapse. And what happens if there's a collapse? There is no work. There are no paychecks. People can't afford food. They can't buy clothes. They can't drive cars because there's no gasoline. You go down the list of stuff that could happen. And with all these crazy people running around the world trying to kill people, and they do it in the name of, quote, Allah. They think they're doing something to serve God by making other people suffer. Well, we can't, we've got to do what we can. But the most important thing is to get the love of Jesus Christ into the hearts of people now while there is a time.